Dr. Kim Schonert-Reichl is an applied developmental psychologist and associate professor in the Department of Education and Counseling Psychology at the University of British Columbia. She began her professional career as a middle school teacher and then as a high school teacher for youth at risk. For more than 20 years, her research has focused on the social and emotional learning and development of children with particular focus on promoting social responsibility in students. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Kim Schonert-Reichl.
Just good afternoon, everyone. It's just such a pleasure to be here, and I'm both thrilled and humbled by being in an environment of so many leaders across the province. So I hope that in the next few minutes I'll be able to give you some information about the topic in which I'm an expert, or trying to be an expert in, is the area of social and emotional learning, and trying to think of how do we connect that to school leadership. And I'll begin, I was listening to all the other panelists who maybe have lots of experience in school leadership and thinking about that, and that's really something that's not really one area of expertise, school leadership, but I do know the research really well in this area. And I do know, for instance, that one of the differences that we know in schools in which children who receive social and emotional learning focus, schools in which the school leader knows about that program and supports it, versus schools where the same programs are in there but the school leader doesn't know about the program or doesn't support it, you only see positive outcomes among students in those schools in which the school leader is supportive. So school leaders play a huge role, and I guess I don't need to tell all of you that. But and so anyways, in the next few minutes, I'm just going to bring you through some of the sort of latest research findings in this area. I want to ask you, how many of you have heard of the term social and emotional learning? Wow, that's great. If I would have even asked that 5 years ago, I think there would have been very few. And well, I also wanted to tell you that I have in my slides, I would love to share any of these slides with anybody who wants them to sort of carry on and move with that. So I'm hoping that this is going to all work. So one of the things we know about educating the heart is an important part of education. And this is a quote that educating the mind without educating the heart is no education at all. That was said by, does anyone know? Someone knows out there, you've been at my talks before. Aristotle. So this notion of putting educating the heart as a part of education is really a key factor. We also know that, we talk a lot about what is success in school, and I think we often go right to academic achievement as being the sort of sole indicator of a school, of being successful in school. And yet if we go back, to the beginning of public education, the role of schools was to not just educate through academic achievement. Certainly the reading and writing and arithmetic were certainly a key goal, but also to educate young people to be contributing members in a society, to have socially skilled, caring citizens. So that really isn't a goal of education, and we wonder what emphasis it gets, and often it's not given a lot. So why now do we need to be concerned about this, particularly this idea of educating of the heart? We know that there are many children out there and youth who are not achieving their full potential, who are not able to, aren't yet just doing okay, but aren't thriving and flourishing. We also know there's increased stress among children today. Well, I just have to say among adults. Any of you ever feel stress? And think about, someone in a study I was reading, they talked about something called this time urgency. Does anyone ever feel time urgency? Getting to your emails and, all of that. There's not enough minutes in the day. A recent issue of Scientific American Mind, which is out this month, September, October, actually talks about stress and how stress can be a toxic to the brain. And among research now looking at young children's developing brains and looking at stress and looking at a hormone called cortisol, finding that actually increased stress, especially among children in poverty and young children, can actually damage the brain. We also know child mental illness is a problem. 1 in 5 children have a mental health disorder, and yet often they go unrecognized. We also know that both children and adults are having a loss of support in communities. And also the importance of sleep. I just heard a stat in which they, well, I should ask all of you, do you get enough sleep? You know, sleep has huge, it's a good, and I have to raise my hand too, I do not. But the whole importance of sleep, and for children, I was reading some stats that said children today get 20% less sleep than children a decade ago. And I have to say, you know, having a 15-year-old at home, do you know what he sleeps with? Not a stuffy. Everyone knows his phone, right? Because anyway. So there's things that are keeping up. We know bullying, and I'm not going to go, I mean, we just had a horrendous experience here in the Lower Mainland with bullying. And the other thing is we know there's an increased interest in focusing on life, looking at education for life and work, looking at something they are calling non-cognitive skills, interpersonal and interpersonal. So if you actually look at the Fortune 500 list and look at, in the 1970s, which skills were required by, you know, really wanted by employers. You see writing, computation, reading, oral communication. Now let's see what happens now. The top thing is teamwork, problem solving, and interpersonal skills. And so if you look at the two together, you find basically from the 1970s to now, they've kind of switched into terms of what is demanded by employers. So there are things that really call upon, like teamwork, social and emotional skills, social intelligence. We also know that these things can be promoted through environments. And actually, again, in the recent issue of Scientific American Mind, talks about some of the recent innovations in schools. In this case, it was the mindfulness education program, Mind Up, that is being used throughout British Columbia. Actually, the latest stat is over 3,000 teachers in the province have been trained in this program. Very interesting. How many of you have Mind Up happening at your schools? So it's a program that's happening. And we need to move from this idea of ill-being to well-being. So what now? And this is, how many of you, when you were in your teacher education program, had any courses that focused on children's social and emotional development or learning? How many of you had any focus in teacher preparation that was on reading? So do you see, so we're being asked to do this, and yet there's not a lot of background. So what now? We talk about a vision for education as this idea of social and emotional learning is a growing movement. And we know that teaching and learning have strong social and emotional components. Dan Goleman, some of you are familiar with his work. You know, in reading through the standards, I saw that the idea of social and emotional learning and social emotional intelligence were really part of the standards, part and parcel of those standards. And some of you have heard of, if you haven't, you should go and look at their website, CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic and Social and Emotional Learning, which really has, I have to say, one of the, the areas of focus for promoting social and emotional learning is through training of school leaders. That is what their focus has been on, because they realize the way to foster this change is through school leadership. And there's a number of documents available through for school leaders on that. The 5 dimensions of social and emotional learning include these 5, which includes self-management, self-awareness, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. The conceptual framework for SEL is about, and I have to get back to what Dennis was saying, and a sort of a theme I picked up around this idea of relationships in school culture. So at the very foundation of any school that promotes social and emotional learning is a school culture that is positive, that promotes positive relationships among adults and among students as well, that leads to social and emotional learning with all these healthy outcomes. Now I also want to, and then I'm going to sort of talk about some of the challenges. One of the things that often has been left out of the conversation of social and emotional learning is this notion of teachers' social and emotional competence and well-being. And so much of the focus for the last several years has been on, bringing in these programs, Second Step, Roots of Empathy, Mind Up is one of them, without giving a real focus on what about the teacher and how what is the teacher's well-being to promote that. And in fact, there's all sorts of factors you've probably seen where a teacher will be delivering one of these programs and then maybe really stressed out at the next moment. And how important it is to really focus on supporting the teacher. Some of the work I've been doing is also a program called Smart in Education. Has anyone heard of this? We've been doing a project of looking at a program for teachers called Stress Management and Resilience Training for Teachers, and we've actually did a small one for school leaders that really is about helping them do stress reduction as well as teaching forgiveness and compassion. And we found that actually when we have teachers go through it, we tell them beforehand, they sort of tell us about a difficult student that they've been dealing with, and we do analysis of the transcript. And then after, we do an analysis, and we find that how they understand the student's behavior is much more with a compassionate focus, a focus on understanding the child's problem versus the child was like put on earth to drive me nuts. Kind of thing, right? So it's really interesting. I just want to emphasize this of how much we need to support teachers, and then I would go on, of course, and then supporting school leaders with their own stress management and well-being, and how we can focus on that. So I'm not going to go through. The one thing is that we know lots of stuff. I want to get to what my main points are. There is a lot of science underlying social and emotional learning. Just a couple of quick findings. One, that we know three things I'm going to say. It's good to be good. We know that people, when you help others, that you actually have more benefits than the person receiving the help. That pro-social behavior or helping others actually is there in 18-month-olds and declines across the elementary school years, that children become less helpful and caring and cooperative toward each other. And third, that we now know, a study we recently did, that when we had grade 10 students volunteer, that it lowered their risk for cardiovascular disease by students helping elementary school students. So there's a number of different studies about this. And this goes into it. And we also know that children who learn these pro-social skills and get along with each other are more likely to get higher academic achievement, as I find. And we also know that the mind matters, that the latest research in neuroscience, I love this stat of we've learned more about the human brain in the last 10 years than in all of history. And really, how do we use that new knowledge to inform what we're doing? Self-control, I don't know if anyone's, self-regulation, are any of your districts working on self-regulation? There's a study that followed 1,000 children from 0 to 32 and found the single best predictor of outcomes at age 32, such as how you manage your finances, your mental health, substance abuse, was self-control during childhood, the middle childhood years. The other thing we know that these skills are malleable, and that the research findings show that children who are in programs that have improve their social emotional skills, but also have an 11% gain in academic achievement and reduced risk for failure. I do again want to underline that the factor that they found that's so critical is the school leader in supporting the programs, that schools in which the school leader was supporting it had much more positive outcomes. We also know SEL is sticky, meaning that there's now some longitudinal research following children who were in programs that promoted social and emotional learning in elementary school till they were 24 and 27, and found that children in programs had not only higher educational attainment, had higher economic attainment, as well as reduced risk for other types of mental health problems, and were more likely to volunteer in their community, actually, and vote. So what are my challenges? How am I doing for time? Am I good? Okay. So I really want to say that 3 components for SEL are institutional recognition, evidence-based program, and contributions from the field and from leadership. And what I saw as my challenges that I put forth to you is to get a buy-in in education to support it. Like, how do you get buy-in that people, there's still people who say, you know, you might buy-in, it's like not the mission of schools, it's the mission of parents to promote these things. Supports for effective implementation. How do you do these programs to support fidelity and sustainability? Support for teacher social, emotional competence and well-being. The assessment of social and emotional learning, because how could you have it if it's not, you know, what's not assessed is not addressed. And finally, the leadership support, and not meaning it at multiple levels, meaning both the support for leaders to do this stuff, but also the leaders to support the teachers in these efforts. Thank you very much.